All right, so with that, we will get started. Thanks everyone for joining our June fire break. My name is Katie Lowe, and I'm the statewide coordinator for the UCANR Fire Network. For those who may be new, fire breaks are a great way for all of us within ANR to connect with each other and learn about all the fire-related work we are doing. Today, we're joined by Daylin Wade, Staff Research Associate for Cooperative Extension's Post-Fire Forest Resilience Initiative, and Susie Kocher, UCCE Forest Advisor for the Central Sierra. So for their presentation today, Daylin and Susie are going to discuss the progress and lessons learned from three pilot emergency forest restoration teams, or EFRTs. They're going to highlight both the successes of the pilot programs and the challenges the lead agencies encountered while forming and implementing these novel programs. And then they'll also cover the post-fire forest resilience initiatives recommendations for improving the success and efficiency of future EFRTs. And then there'll be an opportunity for all of us to ask questions at the end and have discussion at the end. But before we begin, again, a couple of basic Zoom rules. Please keep yourself muted during the presentation. If you have questions for our speakers during the presentation, I encourage you to type them in the chat so you don't forget them, but you can ask them yourself during the discussion portion. So with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Daylin and Susie.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks you all. I'm glad to be here and tell you this story about post-fire reforestation success. So, Daylin, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so emergency forest restoration teams are a new pilot program of the state of California to try and get assistance to private forest landowners quickly after high severity wildfire. So there's a lot of issues after high severity wildfire, specifically trying to reestablish trees in areas where high severity fire has been over a large extent and there are a few seed trees remaining. It's a big issue in the Sierra Nevada specifically, although there can be issues in other regions and forest types, including redwoods and oak woodlands as well. So what an emergency forest restoration team is a local group or organization that's been empowered through funding to get assistance rapidly to private forest landowners to help them reestablish forests at no cost. These were identified as an important strategy in the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Plan that came out in 2021. The whole plan looks at ways to increase fire resilience across the state, including in forested lands. And basically, our work groups on private forest landowners found that there was very little specific assistance to help landowners after wildfires. There had been a system where you could apply for individual cost share programs, but you had to have the ability to do that yourself and have access to contractors, have the work done, and then be reimbursed. And so that leaves out a lot of people who may not have the funds or knowledge or contractors to get the work done. So this system is a block grant given to a local agency to develop a new assistance program that could get the funds more quickly to landowners to start the reforestation process. So next slide. Right. So as we know, fires are increasing in severity. A recent analysis showed that about 36% of wildfire footprints is now high severity, meaning that all the trees are killed and look like the one on the left, as opposed to in the time of settlement, probably around 7%. Private non-industrial landowners are an important segment of the forest ownership in California. They own 7 million acres. and that's 25% of our forested acres. So if we miss those folks, then we have issues with making sure that our forests persist in some areas where high severity fire is burning. And as I said, many lack the time and money and expertise to do this restoration on their own. And this type of model of direct block grant funding to cover people on an area-wide basis and enroll them and get reforestation started and get there more quickly. And so let's go to the next slide. So in 2021, as we all know, we had a really large wildfire season, and the task force agencies that are part of the private landowner working group decided to give this EFRT model a try that had been in the plan. And so the large fires, the Caldor, which burned in El Dorado County, the Plumas EFRT covered Dixie, Beckworth, and the North Complex fire. That was over 1 million acres, with the Dixie fire, though not all of it in Plumas County, was led by the Feather River RCD, and the Tamarack fire in Alpine County on the east side of the Sierra Nevadas was led by Alpine County. So the concept is to get that money out to a local organization who can get it more quickly to landowners. RCDs, Resource Conservation Districts, are in most counties of California, but not in Alpine County, which is why the county there developed their own program. And you can see there was a mix of CAL FIRE and Forest Service state and private funding and disaster resilience funding as well. So it was a block grant to these individual organizations to develop more rapid response to help landowners. Next slide.
Okay, I will take it from here. So again, I'm Daylin Wade. I'm a staff research associate with UC Cooperative Extension's Post-Fire Forest Resilience Initiative. So these pilot EFRTs all did similar post-fire forest restoration work. They all cut dead trees and prepared the site for planting. And that involved removing woody material, sometimes via sale. All of them did some processing of material on site, chipping, masticating, and or pile burning. The Caldor EFRT uniquely did some soil ripping on contour to increase penetration of water and roots, avoid erosion. They all planted conifer seedlings, and they varied in their application of herbicide. The Caldor EFRT required that landowners accept herbicide application to control competing vegetation and to ensure the success of their planted seedlings. The Feather River RCD that managed the Plumas EFRT did not require that application of herbicide, and so something like half of the landowners who received this treatment through 2023 accepted the herbicide. And then on the Tamarack EFRT, they had not yet done any herbicide application when we talked to them. They were mostly focused on just establishing some surface vegetation. This is the dry east side of the Sierra. So they did some seeding for grasses, forbs, and even minimal shrubs to do that establishment. And they also planted conifer seedlings. So we at UC Cooperative Extension, our post-fire forest resilience initiative, we undertook a few different ways of looking at these EFRTs. The first, and what we're going to talk mostly about today, is implementation monitoring. So we talked to what we called key informants, people who were intimately involved in planning and implementing these pilot EFRTs, and developed case studies about various aspects of the different programs, how they handled putting a program together, contracting, permitting, some of the challenges and the opportunities that they found in the ways that they undertook the programs. And then we produced a lessons learned report, which we finished last year. And this includes information up through the end of 2023, so the first 2 years of the pilot programs. And we're going to talk a little bit at the end of our presentation today about some effectiveness monitoring that we're also engaged in, some ecological monitoring looking at seedling, shrub, and fuel dynamics, and that's in partnership with the two RCDs for the Feather River RCD for the Plumas EFRT and the El Dorado RCD for the Caldor. And then in addition, we're also talking to landowners to understand their level of acceptance of these reforestation practices and then compare their opinions about the effectiveness of these practices to what the ecological monitoring data is saying. So for the implementation monitoring side, we were funded by U.S. Forest Service, state and private forestry to track and report on the primary lessons from the first 3 years of the pilot EFRTs. So as I said, we published this report in June 2024. So again, we talked to key informants, we developed case studies, and then the report includes some findings, some conclusions, and recommendations. So what I'll do today is share with you some of the primary findings and recommendations that we included in the report. So the first finding is that the EFRT model definitely works. All 3 of the pilots effectively delivered very quick post-fire technical and financial assistance to landowners who likely could not have done it alone. As Susie mentioned, there's not a lot of options for people to get this assistance after wildfire. So you can see on the right here, we have a chart of the number of acres that were treated by the programs collectively by the end of 2023. And it was something like 2,500 acres of tree and biomass processing and another 1,400 or so acres of tree planting. And then additionally, the Tamarack EFRT did about 2,700 acres of aerial seeding for surface vegetation. So the recommendations are that EFRTs should be continued, should be formed in the future for fires as they arise, and that RCDs are capable as lead agencies and could be provided baseline funding to do forest restoration work in general, and that would facilitate their taking on these programs in the future. So EFRTs also need funding and support. As Susie mentioned, it was special, very flexible disaster relief funding that allowed for very quick formation and implementation of these programs, much faster than traditional grant processes that would have required the lead agency to apply for funds, develop, the projects, the maps, et cetera, before receiving the funds. So that was a very successful way of getting these programs off the ground. So future sources of rapid funding should be explored, and that funding should be sufficient to address the immediate restoration needs in areas that are high priority within fire areas. And advanced funding and technical assistance would be very helpful to provide to local organizations before a fire so that they can be prepared, maybe start to form a team and know how they would address a fire, form a program should a fire happen in their area. And then as fires happen, experienced EFRT leaders should be funded to deploy assistance to new EFRTs and share the lessons that they learned. And we also found by talking to the folks who put on these programs that this post-fire work really required various skills and expertise, and they handled that in different ways, within their own organizations and reaching out to other organizations and including partners within their programs. And we found that it's important for EFRTs to include partners with needed expertise and to define their roles clearly from the beginning to minimize confusion and increase efficiency. That EFRTs should integrate forestry professionals from the beginning with planning and implementation because of their essential knowledge and their industry connections. And also that it's very helpful for EFRTs to seek collaboration with other agencies who are working on private land after wildfire, such as California Office of Emergency Services. This can facilitate information sharing, minimize landowner confusion when they're approached by multiple agencies, and coordinate permitting. As I'll mention, we saw some redundant permitting by different agencies working on the same land, doing similar work. And communication with landowners is absolutely key. Landowners are really vulnerable and overwhelmed after a fire with all that they have to take on, especially if they've lost their home. So we would recommend that EFRT managers prioritize that communication and consider hiring or just assigning a communications manager to be a single point of contact with landowners. The 3 pilots varied in the way that they prioritized where to work. Their scope was essentially the fire area, within their jurisdiction, their counties. The Caldor EFRT, when on their private land work, they also worked at Sierra at Tahoe on a separate contract with the Forest Service to do some tree removal on the ski resort there. But in their work on private land, they focused around the burned town of Grizzly Flats, where the impacts to private non-industrial forest lands were the most. And the Plumas EFRT at first did not prioritize where they would work and quickly realized that they needed to and ended up prioritizing right around the burned town of Greenville and a couple of other areas in Plumas County where the fire effects were most concentrated on private land. The Tamarack EFRT was sort of unique. The fire effects in California to private lands were concentrated around the town of Markleeville. And the Farm Service Agency's program called the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, or EFRP, had actually already helped several larger landowners around that area. So the EFRT was able to focus on smaller landowners and also was able to provide some additional treatments on properties that were treated under the EFRP. But the lesson here is that prioritization, prioritizing certain areas and certain landowners increases efficiency and helps manage landowner expectations, especially when the need for restoration work is large and widespread across a large geographic area. So we recommend that EFRT managers prioritize early and consider prioritizing concentrated geographical areas based on the greatest need. So this picture here is the Caldor fire, and we've got Grizzly Flats highlighted there in the map pop out, and you can see that the darker red is the concentration of impacts to private non-industrial forest lands. So they also varied in how they handled sellable wood material from the properties that they worked on. The Caldor EFRT did not include any commercial wood sales under their work contracts, but they encouraged landowners to work with an RPF to coordinate those sales before the treatments happened. Whereas the Plumas EFRT allowed for commercial sales under their contracts where the operators could sell logs or wood chips, those were allowed under the contracts. For the Tamarack EFRT, markets were not really available, so no commercialization happened under the EFRT contracts, only a little bit beforehand. We also found that selling dead trees as logs or other wood products reduces the volume that has to be processed on site. So markets are limited. So, however the lead agencies handle commercialization, whether they suggest that landowners do it ahead of time or whether they allow it within their contracts, the recommendation is that they should encourage wood sales in one way or the other. And that EFRT funding in the future should allow flexibility to sell that woody material whenever possible. And of course, development of wood products industry would very much facilitate this. So the most complicated part of our report was about permitting, because the three lead agencies, they were all required to do an environmental review process because of their public funding, and all followed a somewhat different permitting pathway, which highlighted the fact that there is not a clear and streamlined permitting pathway. The pathway that they took was primarily determined on whether or not they commercialized wood. So the Plumas EFRT, because they did include commercial wood sales under their contracts, they filed a CAL FIRE emergency notice to cover merchantable tree removal and submerchantable tree removal. However, because of their public funding, their understanding was that they needed to follow a CEQA permitting process as well for the planting and herbicide activities that they did. So there was some redundancy in that permitting process. The Caldor and Tamarack EFRTs, because they did not commercialize wood, did a CEQA exemption to cover all of their activities. And one thing of note that they told us is that the CAL FIRE emergency notice allows the forester who writes the notice to do an archaeology review, whereas the CEQA exemption requires a professional archaeologist, which is a little harder to find, can be more expensive. And we were told by the managers that had they had to do that for every piece of land, they would have eaten up a lot of program funds. So the lesson here is that post-fire permitting is complicated and confusing. Each pathway comes with some limitations in scope and timeliness. Of note, each of these pilot programs avoided working in any known or suspected archaeological site, and that included mining ditches, which were pretty extensive around Grizzly Flats in the Caldor fire area. So there are significant untreated areas that, based on these permitting pathways, they were just not able to treat. So the recommendation that we included in our report is that the California Natural Resources Agency and the California Board of Forestry should identify a clear and streamlined permitting pathway for post-fire forest restoration projects in order to streamline and clarify the environmental compliance process. So the last lesson I'll share is about the role that the other programs, the state and federal cost share programs, played within the fire areas. So we also talked to NRCS, which has the EQIP program, and CAL FIRE, which has the CFIP program, and for the Farm Service Agency about their emergency forest restoration program. And this shows the number of landowners who were assisted by these programs in the fire areas addressed by the pilot EFRTs by the end of 2023. So the EQIP program had assisted 8 landowners in the Caldor fire area, and all of them were outside of the Grizzly Flats area, so away from where the EFRT worked. And the CFIP program and the EFRP program had not assisted any landowners in the Caldor fire area at that time. The EFRP program has to be initiated for a specific disaster, and it was not initiated for either the Caldor or any of the Plumas fires. So in the Plumas fire area, so again, that's the Dixie, the North Complex, and the Beckworth Complex fires. 2 landowners were assisted in that whole area, both in the North Complex fire by EQIP, 4 landowners by CFIP. And those were, again, all in the North Complex fire. So the Tamarack fire, we had 3 landowners assisted by EQIP, none assisted by CFIP, and most significantly, there were 18 landowners assisted by the EFRP program, which was initiated for that particular disaster. And that covered about 3,000 acres of mostly tree removal. And then a lot of the planting and the seeding was actually done by the EFRT on a lot of those parcels. Okay, so the lesson here is that EFRTs can and should collaborate with these cost share programs. They could collaborate to increase the impact of restoration work after a fire. It's clear that EFRTs, as we mentioned, if they focus on a certain area, that is more efficient for those programs, and that leaves a lot of area within these fire footprints for these other programs to come into play. And then cost share programs such as EQIP and CFIP should play a role in providing future assistance to landowners, as the work that the EFRTs do is a rapid, immediate post-fire suite of treatments that gets the ball rolling, and there are other things to do down the road. And the EFRTs could assist in future management by providing management plans for landowners that they assist when capacity allows. And our report is dedicated to our late colleague, Ryan Tompkins, and he played a very strong role in putting together this report and conceiving of this whole program. So we always dedicate to him. And one last thing I'll mention is our effectiveness monitoring undertaking. I'll go through this really quick. This is just a quick overview of what we are collaborating with the RCDs to do. We are collaborating with them to monitor the reforestation effectiveness on the ground, so ecological monitoring. Both of these RCDs, El Dorado RCD and Feather River RCD, wrote us into separate grants that they had to assist them with monitoring. So Nick Dutch and Ryan Tompkins laid out an initial plan for these RCDs to monitor seedling health and vigor, spatial arrangement of seedlings, shrub competition, and fuel loading. So the idea is to monitor the first year after planting, the third, and the fifth. So the first year of data collection happened last year. This was mostly undertaken by the RCD staff and crews and with our assistance. One thing that is unique and interesting about this monitoring plan is that it is a way to spatially track where the seedlings are. So each plot has a belt transect, and there's a grid that within which you note the location of each seedling so that you'd be able to come back and track the same seedlings in the future. So the first year of data collection happened in 2024. And for the Plumas EFRT, there were 18 landowners who had received the full treatment by the end of 2023. And so those are the parcels that were monitored for that first year. They had all received tree removal, site preparation. About half of them had received herbicide, half of them had not, and conifer planting. For the Caldor EFRT, 11 landowners received full treatment by the end of 2023. So 11 parcels were monitored. Tree removal, site preparation with herbicide on all of those, and some soil ripping, as I mentioned, and conifer planting were what were what was undertaken there. So we are producing a report for them each year with each year's data to give them information at least about the seedlings and about the shrub dynamics so that they can decide if they want to do any additional planting, any additional competition control, or maybe even some thinning, and provide information for the landowners as well. The final thing we're going to undertake is a report at the end of 2026, or excuse me, by March 2026, which is actually the end of our grant period, with all of the information synthesized. So with that, I will pass it on to Susie to talk about the interviews of landowners that we're doing.
Sure. So it's been exciting to look at a lot of different facets of the same projects, both the physical, biological effectiveness of planting and the social dynamics of it, which has been super interesting. So we really wanted to identify how landowners are perceiving the reforestation services that they are receiving. And some of that is because of narratives about landowners knowing things or not, or being upset by herbicide or not, from what we hear from our forestry colleagues. So we really wanted to actually hear from the landowners themselves about how they're perceiving the work being done on their property. So we developed an interview project. We completed our interviews by January of 2025 from that group that had received services in 2023. We reached 7 of 11 landowners on the Caldor fire and 13 of 18 on the Plumas EFRT area. Some people are not able to be reached or don't respond. Some people really don't want to talk after a wildfire, or have sold their property or decided that they just can't really handle this next phase. We did on-site and Zoom interviews. There's Daylin in the Caldor fire talking to the landowner about how this reforestation process has worked for them. We use semi-structured open-ended questions where we just ask them to talk. And then if they don't answer, we then ask specific questions. Then we also had survey questions using a Likert scale, where we asked people to rank from 1 to 5 how they felt about specific practices while we were speaking with them. Next slide, please. And so we have a lot of data, a lot of the qualitative data that we haven't actually analyzed yet. We have deduced software, and our plan is to do a thorough analysis, but having the Likert scale questions made us able to do a quick analysis after the data collection. And generally we ask people how happy they are with the program. The main question there, the summary question after our conversations, were: the work on my property has established a future resilient forest. So strongly agree, strongly disagree. So let's see, purple, strongly agree, and blue, somewhat agree. Together, that's 18 out of 19 felt positive that planting the trees really helped ensure that they have a forest. So you can see these are some of the quotes from the people we talked to. Generally, quite a few said they couldn't have done anything themselves. So really we're able to establish forests in areas where people would not have done it otherwise. And they had their own reasons. Sometimes it was lack of contractors, lack of knowing what to do. Generally in the post-fire environment, there's a lot of competition for a limited number of contractors. So this type of program allowed it to happen in a coordinated fashion for people who may not have had a property size large enough to have rated high on a contractor's list of projects to bid on. Next slide, please. Here are landowners' impressions of the different reforestation practices we asked them about. And I put N in quotes because it's not a quantitative study. A qualitative study is supposed to be looking at the themes that people come up with, not how frequent they are. So even though it's not an N, I've listed it as an N, so you can see how frequently themes came up. But this is not implying that a larger population would have these ideas in this distribution level, but you develop these themes and then you could do a quantitative assessment based on having discovered these themes in your conversations. So the group we did talk to, the purple is strongly agree and the blue is somewhat agree. You can see there was the most agreement around dead tree removal, reducing future fire risk. It was interesting. We would talk to people about what did you think about the dead tree removal and why is it important? Generally, people came up with aesthetic reasons or safety reasons from hazards. They would say, well, those looked horrible, or I was worried they would fall. People did not immediately come up with the fuels connection, which is interesting, I think. And in our workshop series, we do see people and describe the increased risk of high severity fire to the new stand when there's a lot of wood left behind. But when we talked to the landowners, they didn't necessarily think about that as they talked to us. But then when we brought it up for this ranking, they said, oh, yeah, that's important. This next one is that summary one again. You can see there's a lot of agreement there. Trees landed on my property will grow into a mature forest. There was less agreement with just the understanding that, there could be future wildfires. We don't know what the future will bring. And so that would explain that one. Seedlings would outcompete shrubs was also an area where people were not at all sure. They typically said they were surprised at how quickly shrubs grew back after the fire. And they could see them on the landscape. Whether or not that was going to lead to trees winning that race, they weren't completely sure. That was the number one least agreed upon practice. Next slide, please. So we broke that out into the folks who agreed to have herbicide and those who did not. Those who didn't allow herbicide were less confident that their seedlings would outcompete shrubs. That high one, the upper one, herbicide applied, you can see those who had it were more likely to think that their tree seedlings were going to outcompete the shrubs. But when you look down at those who did not, it was kind of an even split. It was interesting talking to people about herbicide use generally, because it is usually a high contention practice. And there were some people who said no to it. We had an interesting combination of people when you talk to real people. We had a fellow who said he wished he had said yes. He didn't fully realize how intense the shrub component would be. We had a fellow who said no, who seemed to be correct, in my opinion, in the ecotone where he was kind of in a meadow along a stream. There didn't seem to be a lot of trees growing back or shrubs. We had a woman who thought she'd said no, but had said yes. So, it's a messy world out there. But I would say overall, I did not really pick up on a lot of anti-herbicide feeling that we generally think is common. And we did see evidence of those who'd said no, regretting it. So, yeah, this kind of gives you some background on the disagreements around tree seedling competition vigor. Next slide, please. Okay, so planting and the first couple of years afterwards is just one stage in managing a healthy forest, which includes potential future management. There could be needs for thinning later, or those types of things, fuels reduction, prescribed fire. So we wanted to know how likely the landowners who are receiving these services were going to actually spend effort to manage their forest afterwards. And you can see likely, very and somewhat likely were pretty high. Very unlikely, I would say those were mostly people who said, after this huge event, I'm totally done with this. I'm going to pass it on to my kids. I'm going to sell. I just can't really deal with this anymore. It's too much. How likely are you to apply for further assistance programs? Basically, people were very impressed with the work done under this program for the most part, and said yes, that they thought that that was pretty likely. Next slide, please. I think that's my last slide. So I will just summarize by saying we did not really find a huge gap between how landowners think about reforestation and how professionals feel about it and think about how it should be done. There were some areas where there was some vigorous natural regeneration. So we had one landowner a little concerned about a high density of seedlings, mostly natural seedlings. I had to think about the future, and maybe some thinning on that one property was necessary. And there were some areas where there weren't a lot of seedlings. So working with our RCDs, they are drawing up plans for management within the next 2 years of the grant period. But I found it quite reassuring that landowners and professionals did not really have a huge gap in their knowledge and understanding. And generally, landowners said they learned a lot through this process, and were happy with the results. So we will be working on this report also, ideally as part of our big March final report, and a journal article as well. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Daylin and Susie, for that awesome presentation. I think now we'll transition to the Q&A discussion period. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, it's a small enough group, so feel free to unmute yourself. You can turn on the camera now, I think, and ask your question.
I have a question that I actually wonder if I've already asked you. So if I have, forgive me. And it's going to go a little bit back into the weeds in the beginning of your presentation. I was curious about the aerial seeding for vegetation, which I think there's a lot of science showing that not being super effective at erosion control and also introducing weeds. So I'm curious, how you all interface with folks on making those decisions, and B, if you're something you're actually monitored, that specific treatment or not. Even with weed-free, just gonna put that out there.
Yeah, that's the Tamarack fire, and it's an east side system. So the implementers were very confident that seeding was not necessarily for erosion control, but for like forage improvement and meadow enhancement. So they did not consider it to be an erosion control tactic, as far as I remember, Daylin.
Sure, but I guess even for the other things, the potential for non-native species introductions is kind of the big risk there, right?
We did not monitor seedlings or seed on that component. They didn't have an RCD. And so we did not end up with a relationship with the county to do ongoing monitoring there.
Got it.
Our experts on the east side told us they felt any vegetation was better than none because of moisture limitations. So we just kind of took them at their word. What would you say, Daylin?
Yeah, I would agree with that. They, in the absence of anyone at the county who had the expertise to take on this program, they hired an environmental consultant who had done a lot of work on the east side, and that was what they decided was best. And I don't know if they're doing any monitoring. That would be something we could look into. I knew they were going to do some type of monitoring, but I don't know if they were doing any that would answer those questions. But yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
It's also a practice promoted by the Farm Services Agency that did the EFRP, Emergency Forest Restoration Program. So I think it's a standard FSA practice. that
It's
they're used
probably
to.
standard for it, yeah, if you have ag related goals, and just that I don't think of forests as always having those associated with it. But yeah.
That's right. And I would say FSA is kind of new at forests. And they said so much when we spoke with them. It was their Nevada office, right? And so they had to hire contract expertise as well to understand how to deal with forests. And yeah, the whole program, it's not completely clear to me why those programs have not been initiated on the west side of the Sierra. Farm services hasn't been as tied in to forestry, I think, is one of the issues. I don't know, Daylin. We tried to talk to people and figure out what triggers an FSA EFRP, but never really did find out exactly, how that happens.
Yeah, the someone at the FSA office who is managing multiple programs and probably has no experience with this program is responsible for requesting the funds from the national office. And the initiation can be requested by anyone. If they have landowners coming to them asking them for assistance, then they have that pressure to initiate the program. Um, why it didn't happen, I don't know. I think probably it's a lack of anyone really knowing it exists. Landowners, maybe people at the agency knowing it exists, but not quite having the bandwidth or knowledge to actually step forward and do it.
Very good. Thanks.
An FSA is the Farm Services Agency, which is one of the main assistance programs that helps farmers. There is a little bit of cattle ranching over there on the east side in Alpine County. So I'm sure that those folks are kind of accustomed to using FSA and being registered with FSA as one reason that triggered EFRP, unlike the other areas that we worked in.
Yeah, I would say just as a final comment that I do understand that to be a barrier in itself, that people who own forest land don't think of themselves as agricultural producers, and that, to be in the realm of something like a farm services agency or even for equip, that's also people are considered to be producers, if they're registered with NRCS. And that's not something that most forest landowners identify with.
Yeah. So NRCS, if you're going to apply for environmental quality incentive program, requires you to register as a producer with the Farm Services Agency. And like Daylin said, many people don't think of that. Many of us in the forestry community who've been trying to help landowners haven't really focused on helping them register as producers. But there is a whole focus on new producers who's owned their lands for less than 10 years and special grant funds available. So it's really something we've been trying to help forest landowners understand and access funds for doing work on their property.
Cool. Does anyone else have any questions for Daylin or Susie? If not, I think we're at 12:45, which is the end of the session. Elena, do you have a question? Okay. Well, thank you so much to Daylin and Susie for your time today and teaching us all about EFRTs. I found that to be very informative and also really interesting. I learned a lot. So thank you so much, everybody. This is our last fire break, probably for the summer, just so people have time to go do field work. So we'll probably return with the bi-monthly webinars again starting in September. So thank you so much for your time today. See you later.
Thanks for having us.